This is a big topic. You know, talking about acquisitions for game studios is a big topic. It usually takes me about an hour. I'm going to try to do the most important stuff, what you must know, in the next 25 minutes. I probably won't make it, but we'll try. First of all, why should you listen to me? I was already introduced, so you got a lot of it. But essentially, I know a lot about games. I've been in Xbox for 11 years before I left to start Strategic Alternatives with my business partner. And I've done a lot of things that, in retrospect, make a lot of sense for what we do. But we're a strategy consulting firm that also works in acquisition advisory, mostly for independent game developers and a few publishers. So first of all, let's start with a little census of the room. Quickly, how many of you, do any of you own your own game companies? Raise your hand. Excellent. Have any of you ever sold a game company to anybody else? Yeah, one in the back. Thank you, Brian. And how many of you currently, no, I'm not going to ask that question because that's a private question. Let's talk about what motivations. And motivations are really important because, you know, it determines your fate ultimately. All right? So why do people sell? Usually you start a game studio because you're passionate about making games, you have a creative vision, and then some years down the road something happens, like you've been operating for a long time and you're tired, or you get married, you have kids, and you're like, you know what, like I want a different life. Or suddenly like you're interested in things like, you know, Internet of Things or AI or cryptocurrency, and you're like, you know, I want to do something else with my life. At that point, people start thinking, about an exit. So these are some of the reasons, and the reason why I go through this is because it determines your fate. First, because your priorities have shifted, because you realized goals that you had when you set out to make games, and now you want to do something else, and because, or perhaps because the opportunity that is presented is bigger than you can do by yourself operating alone. Some of the bad reasons to try to get an exit are because you're tired. But it's very common, it's a tiring business, right? And also because you have a bigger problem in the business or with yourself. For example, if you haven't structured the company correctly and you're facing a divorce, that could be a problem. If you have a health issue, that could be a more important problem than your business, right? If the business is going down and you know it, but no one else knows it yet, that could also be an issue. So there are good reasons and bad reasons, and they lead you to different places. Commodity exits or premium exits, right? Obviously, the good reasons could lead to premium exits. The bad reasons could lead to commodity exits, because in a commodity exit situation, you have to sell. So what is a commodity exit? And that's what we would call an acqui-hire, right? An acqui-hire situation is basically one where you're going down, you know it, you have to sell, and you sell for a very low price. They give you a little bit of something for all your trouble, and then they basically take over all of your employee contracts, right? So they start paying your payroll. And you still work for them, and you have some sort of incentive plan probably, and you get paid something, but it's not really, it's just like more like a bonus than it is something that changes your life. The pricing in such a thing is very generic. There's little tolerance for negotiation. The people who buy you are looking for a value pickup. They're looking for something opportunistic like vultures. And so they're not going to tolerate excess negotiation. You know, on the premium side, you become a strategic asset. In other words, they need you, and maybe there are a couple substitutes to you, maybe there are no substitutes to you, but they need you. And therefore, they're talking about bigger numbers. And when they're talking about bigger numbers, suddenly you have complicated deals, right? It's not a simple deal that can be done in 2 weeks or a month. You're talking about something that can be done in about 6 months, 4 months at the fastest, right? Because the deal is strategic to the buyer. And they expect you to negotiate. They expect you to bargain hard, and they respect it when you do. And they're not going to walk away because they need you. And the greater deal value drives lots of complexity and elaborate deal structure. So let's talk a little bit about value, right? enterprise value, not like the Starship enterprise, but more about the enterprise of your company, right, as a business. So how do companies that buy other companies measure what you're worth? We measure what you're worth, and this is from my experience as a corporate buyer on the Microsoft side and others. But we measure primarily in this order. We look at your EBITDA, right? This is your net profit, your earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, amortization, right? And we look at your EBITDA as a cash flow, and then we apply some multiple to it, and that's how we come up with a valuation. Now, a lot of times, right, you know that you don't have cash flow, but you may have other valuable things. Some of those valuable things are intellectual property in the form of a game. Now, it's great to have a game that makes money, but it's even better to have a franchise that makes money. So if you have one, so all around this industry, right, you will find lots of studios that had one hit game, made a lot of money off that game, made 50 other games and didn't do anything, right? The question is, if you can have one successful game, can you make a second successful game out of that same IP universe? Because then suddenly you have a franchise, and a franchise is a platform for monetization and exploitation, right? And so that can be valuable, and in fact, incredibly valuable, even if you even in the absence of cash flow. Then another thing these days, because of the mobile revolution, is cross-promotable users. What if you have a game, makes decent money, but you have a ton of users? Like let's say you have, in the case of one of my clients, a couple of 100 million users, right? But the money's okay, but the 100 million users is pretty interesting from a cross-promotion perspective. That creates value for your business. Another thing that I can't emphasize enough is to have a proven, well-managed organization that has a strong middle management layer. Why? Because if I'm going to pay you, let's say you have a team of 50 people, make good games, there are 3 founders, right? And there's very little middle management because they all just kind of work with their minions, right? Why would I pay you $150 million? Why would I pay you $150 million? Because in 3 years, you'll each have $50 million and you're going to leave. And then what am I left with? Like 47 minions, right? I need a team that can operate and create great games in the absence of the founders. I need the founders to make themselves irrelevant so that I want to buy their company. And if you can't make yourself irrelevant, you're not worth very much. So I want you to think about your business in these terms. And then, of course, a proven ability to create consistently money-making product, right? Great product. That's so hard to do. If you can do that, then you're in the billion-dollar category. And then, of course, patents. If you're working in VR, AR, any of the new technology platforms where there aren't a lot of patents, I would say, and you're working in that area, anything you can think of, see if there's a patent value to it and file for that patent, even though it's expensive. And the reason why is because down the road, that patent may have its own value and may be valuable to others, especially bigger entities, if the industry in AR, VR take off, or whatever it is you're working in. So I'm going to go quickly and very quickly. I wish I had more time today to talk about it, but these are some of the rules that I like to impart with clients in terms of how to build your enterprise value. First, this is obvious, right? Always make great games. Always make great games. Always do great work. The reason is you're a game studio, and the whole purpose of your existence is to make games. If you're going to make mediocre games, why be in the business, right? We're all in this to make quality product. You're always judged on the quality of your last product. It doesn't always have to make money, but if you make a great product, there will always be a deal for you. There will always be an investor for you. But if you make okay product, so-so product, that's going to be really hard to convince people to invest in you. You're going to have to give a bunch of excuses for why you didn't make it as good as you could have made it, right? So the number one thing you've always got to do is make great games. That often, by the way, talks about polish. right? Polish is some of the most important 10% of the budget that you have. It's the last 10%, and it's the most important 10%. And anytime you have a threat to your overall budget, when someone takes a cut of it, or or there's a budget shortfall, it's that 10% that suffers, and that's why people don't make great games, because they never reserve enough room and time for polish. Then I can't say enough, and I think all of you know this, always fight to retain your IP. Sure, when you're young and you're getting started, you're a small, unproven studio with no leverage, you're gonna lose your IP more often than not. But that's no excuse for not trying. Always fight. Always be an asshole about owning IP. And then always have a strategy. I like to go around, I always ask studios, like, what's your strategy? And more often than not, the strategy that I get is, well, we want to make a great game and make money. Not a strategy, that's kind of just a wish, but it's not a specific strategy, right? A strategy is about how you're going to be different in the space, what kind of developer you're going to be, where you see the market going, and how you fit inside of that as a unique entity. And if you don't have an understanding of what you're going to do to make yourself unique, you don't have a strategy. And then this is so important. All of this is so obvious, and I apologize in advance. It's easy to say, it's hard to do, right? But let's just make it concrete. Always avoid gaps between projects. This is 80% of the time when studios go under, it's because of this. It's because, they had a paying project, and then there's a gap before they could find another one, and they go bankrupt. Most developers operate on a very thin bank account that can cover 1 or 2 months of payroll. We all know that, right? That's why I have my next rule. Next rule is the 6-month rule. So the 6-month rule is do whatever you can do to keep 6 months of payroll in the bank. Why? Because 6 months of payroll in the bank is the difference between having to say yes to a publisher, to a distributor, to some entity you have business dealings with, and being able to say no. And no gives you choice. No is the very foundation of strategy, right? Because it gives you options, and it gives you time, and it gives you leverage. If you got 2 months of payroll in the bank and your publisher says, you know what, I don't like what you delivered, I'm not going to pay you till you give me a better version of it, you're going to say yes, because you have no choice. If you have 6 months, you can say, no, screw you, I don't want to do that. I'm going to go find a different deal. And then they'll come back and they'll be like, oh, I'm sorry, we're a little heavy-handed, we'll pay you, right? People like to screw with you, not because they're mean, but because they can. But 6 months gives you optionality. Next, it's a hit-driven industry. We know this, right? Therefore, you've got to take as many shots on goal as you can. You got to have as many, in baseball parlance, at-bats, but in Europe, I'll use the soccer analogy. You got to take as many shots on goal as you can. It's so important. The first game may not work out. The third game may not work out, but the 10th game may make you a billionaire. You don't know. There's so many stories in this space about exactly this thing happening that each of you can probably think of 3 cases right now in your own heads. But you've got to line yourself up to try as many times as you possibly can before your business goes under. And then ABU, always be upgrading your team. So this is the game within the game, right? You start with the people that you can afford. Any of you ever played Game Dev Story? Few of you, good. Game Dev Story is great. You start with the team that you got. They're not a great team, right? They're comprised of like your cousins and the weird kid down the street and all this stuff. And then as you start to make money, you hire better and better developers that work on your team. Always be upgrading your team. At some point in time, when you become successful, you'll look at your cousin and you'll be like, you know what? He's not really that good an artist. I need a more professional artist. And you'll do that. Always don't worry about the personal connections. Don't worry about loyalty. Do the right thing by them, but never sacrifice the team quality. Always be upgrading that team. And then hire excellent middle management as you grow. Now, this is the point where it's really hard to tell founders, you got to hire people better than you, under you. because they feel threatened, like they're going to lose their control. But the truth is, they're actually gaining control. They're expanding the value of their company, and they're starting to elevate themselves and worry about bigger strategic issues, which are their natural realm. And underneath you, you have talented middle managers that once you provide enough guidance and you manage them correctly, can actually operate your business for you. That's gold. And then finally, I'll say, you should always seek business with companies that can buy you down the line. Most of the time when a company gets bought by another company, it's someone they've already worked with in some capacity. So there was an earlier question in this panel, if some of you were here, like what should I consider when working with a publisher? One of the non-obvious things that I would say is, does the publisher have deep pockets? Do they acquire companies that they've worked with, right? Is this a strategic relationship for me down the road, or are these guys small-pocketed, non-inquisitive, and kind of a waste of my time if I have other options? So always try to continue to do business with entities that might buy you. And don't just focus on one. I know so many studios that all they do is make games for Sony or Microsoft or someone else. When you've made enough games with them, make games with someone else, okay? So a little bit on offers and deals. First of all, a meditation on company valuation. This is one of the principles of finance, and it's very important to understand. It's not about your number. It's not about what you think you're worth. The value of your company is the value to the buyer of your company. So in other words, in just abstract terms, they look at you, they plug you into their network, and then as a result, a set of cash flows comes years after year. And you add those cash flows up, and that's the value of your company to them. So if Sony comes to you and says, I'd like to buy you for $30 million, and Tencent comes to you and says, I want to buy you for $50 million, they are both being genuine, and they're both correct. In other words, your value is all over the map depending on who buys you. And it's about finding the right buyer that for you is the right price and is the right fit. So I'll talk more about that later. But the most important thing I want you to know is that when someone comes to you and says, hey, I want to buy you, what are you worth? It's a stupid question. It's a trick question. Don't fall for it. It's not about what you want to sell for. It's about what you're worth to them. Corporate buyers are going to perform several different kinds of valuations. These guys are professionals, right? You're up against people that buy lots of companies. And they're going to do all sorts of valuation exercises. The first is EBITDA times some multiple, right? The earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, amortization, times some multiple. The typical industry multiple is you take EBITDA and you multiply times 6 or 7, and that's the value of the company. If you've got high growth, let's say you're growing year over year, 100%, I could see an 8 or 9 times multiple on your EBITDA, right? We sold a company, Wordsworth Friends. They were making $1 million a month, growing 150% a month, right? And so a team of 11 sold for hundreds of millions of dollars, as you can imagine, and it was a really good purchase for Zynga. Another valuation they're going to do is a DCF, a discounted cash flow. Discounted cash flow analysis is a super businessy sort of thing, which is really an analysis of the cash flow. It's what I said before, that when they plug you into their system, what are the resulting cash flows over a set of years, put in some assumptions, and that's a DCF. Comps. So they'll look at comps, which means basically, you look at other companies that are similar to you that have been purchased either by that company or by others, and they compare, are they out of line, are they in sync, is this roughly the value? Comps are important, but it's hard to get, because in this industry, we don't publicly report a lot. And then they'll do a build versus buy. Let's say a company says, oh my God, we've got to build we have to build a role-playing game studio. Or we could buy one. And they do an analysis. If we build an RPG studio from scratch, it'll take us 3 years, and then it'll cost us this much to hire with a certain amount of uncertainty. It'll cost us roughly $30 or $40 million. Or we could buy these guys for $20 million. They'll do that analysis. And then, this is the last and probably the most important to you, if I can emphasize anything, they're going to do an analysis of what they believe your number is. So they're going to take you out to dinner, they're going to invite your spouse, they're going to check out what car you drive, where you live, how much the house costs. They're going to talk to your wife or your husband about your lifestyle, what your goals and aspirations are, and they're going to try to figure out whether you're already successful and you're going to wait for a high valuation, or whether you're really hungry to make $1 million and you'll sell for a super low valuation. Don't fall for it. As a corporate buyer, I did that trick all the time and it worked like anything. It worked like gold, right? Because I'll talk to someone, I'll talk to their spouse, and I'll be like, these guys will settle for $5 million, right? Didn't matter if the company is worth 20. I could just make a $5 million offer and they jump at it, right? Don't fall for it. Sometimes, if they haven't done that homework, there are guys that just go around shaking trees, looking for fruit to fall out. So they'll go to every studio, and you'll be one of them. You're at a cocktail party, or they'll give you a call. They'll say, hey, I saw this article. Like, you guys are really interesting. I'm interested in buying you. How about $2 million? How about some small number, right? Relatively. Don't fall for that either, right? That's someone that is a value buyer trying to figure out if they can sucker you into selling for cheap. So they're just trying to figure out your exit number. And the thing is, that's a low-ball offer. And the low-ball offer is a good thing in that there's some interest in you, but it's a bad thing because it means you really won't have a substantial negotiation for another 6 months. Why? Because when you respond to the LBO in the way that I'm going to tell you how to respond to it, they're going to walk away. And when they walk away, they can't come back a week later and say, oh, you remember when I offered you $2 million for your company, but I'm willing to pay you $20 million today? Because it seems like they were trying to cheat you, and that's not a great way to have a relationship, right? Work out one way or another. What they're actually going to do is they're going to sit around and wait for 6 months. If they're really serious and they need you for some reason, most likely, 9 times out of 10, they won't come back. But if they do come back, they're coming back because they need you for a reason. And they'll come back with a legitimate offer. But it won't be immediately, right? 6 months. So here's how I want you to respond if you ever get an LBO. I want you to be polite. I want you to thank them for their interest. I want you to let them know that you've never considered selling because you've been so focused on building your business. I haven't had time to think about selling. Why would I sell? But if me and my partners, if we ever sold, we would definitely sell for a premium valuation. Probably LBO is just a time waster for you and for me. I thank you for your interest. Let's stay friends, and then go back to the mine and keep working. Let's say that someone comes back from the LBO 6 months later and they want to buy, or something happens in your business and you finally get someone that seems serious and is talking real numbers. How do you make a deal? Well, let's talk about the process first. I would say this, I can't stress this enough. Like making a publishing deal or a syndication deal is kind of like taking a day hike on the weekend to clear your head. You pack up your water and a candy bar and your hiking shoes and you go out, you hike to the mountaintop, you come back, you're good. You don't need any help. But if you're going to do an acquisition, that's like hiking Everest. Do you want to hike Everest by yourself? I would not advise it. Don't do an acquisition by yourself. It's very helpful for you in terms of maximizing the deal and also not screwing yourself in the process. Not undervaluing yourself, to have some kind of professional help. And there are professional advisors, and there's friends too that have been through the process that might be able to help you. But no matter who it is, I want you to at least seek some help. Trust me, I've been there on the other side, and while I negotiate with people, I think, man, you really should have some help. But I never say that, because that would be counter to my old interests. When you have partners, it's very important before you get into a serious acquisition that you guys have sat down and you have carved out a number for yourselves in your head at which you'll move. And here's why. Because if you have 3 or 4 founders, let's say, for the sake of argument, 3 or 4 founders in your business, and one of you has already sold a business and is independently wealthy, and the other 3 of you is, driving a Nissan March around, right? And I had a Nissan March growing up, so that was awesome. But let's say you're driving around, your 12-year-old car, and you're kind of hungry for an exit. Your number is going to be different. The wealthy founder might say, I'm not going to sell for less than 50 million. And the less wealthy founders are like, I'd really sell at 10. And so you guys suddenly are not aligned. And this lack of alignment is dangerous to the negotiation, especially depending on who owns how many shares. Because I, as a corporate buyer, will figure out that structure, that schism, and I will approach the other shareholders who would sell at a lower price, who will then force you to sell, right? So that alignment is really, really important. You got to sit down, you got to talk about it. And then the things that matter. So everyone thinks, oh, it's the money that matters. It's not the money that matters. The most important thing that matters is your comfort with the potential acquirer. As the owner of the business, you're going to be in bed with these guys. You got to like what they're doing. You got to want to work with them. You got to see them as honorable, trustworthy, right? That's the first thing. Then the next is the people on your team, right? I mean, you care about these people. You hired them. You pay them, right? They depend on you. So how is the buyer going to treat your company, your employees? That's important. And then the structure of the deal. And I'll talk about deal structure. And then after that, the size of the offer. Then that comes into play. And then after that, there are other considerations like tax efficiency. You could get into an acquisition deal and find yourself with tax liabilities that make you bankrupt. Not a good situation. Don't give in to the hype. Publicized deal values are interesting, but don't be impressed by them, because deal structure matters more than deal size. Deal structure. Assured portion, contingent portion. The assured portion is basically what you're guaranteed to get paid, and that'll usually come out in a 3 to 4 year time frame to keep you on the hook so you'll stay. And it's usually paid in cash or in some sort of liquid asset like equity. And the contingent portion is the earnout. The earnout is a set of if-then statements, like if this game makes $2 million in profit by year 3, or if this game has 20 million downloads by year 4, right? So there are these KPIs, these metrics, and if you meet them, hopefully you'll earn more, right? Often it's used, the earnout is often used to close a valuation gap. So if they say, we want to pay you 30, and you say, but my plan says I'm going to be worth 60, and they say, well, prove it to me, that's the 30 delta, right? So it's used to often close a valuation gap between buyer and seller. This is an illustrative deal timeline, and I'm not going to go into it because I don't have the time, but this presentation I'm happy to make available, and you can look at it. But this is basically how you might spend 6 months of an acquisition timeline. And then on the bottom there's all the stuff that you're doing, right? Soul searching, courtship, back and forth, analysis, right, etc. Providing information to buyers. So remember, an offer is not an offer unless it's in writing. If they're giving you a number verbally, it's not an offer. They're going to ask you for information about your finances, your product pipeline, all that stuff. Be very careful what you give someone, especially someone you're already doing a publishing deal with, because they could find ways to screw you with that same information, and don't think that they won't. Not because they're bad people, but because they can. And so, again, if they ask you, what are you worth? You have to reply, we were so busy, we've never thought about it. Can you all just practice that with me? We've never thought about it. Say it. A little unenthusiastic, but the general idea, yes. So, show us your financials. They'll ask you, hey, show us your financials. And you say, after an offer. After you give me an offer, I'll give you my financials as part of due diligence. Before that, I'll give you some top-line stuff. What's my revenue? What's my EBITDA? Last couple of years. But I won't give you everything. until a due diligence. Show us your contracts, your documentation, only after an offer. Show us your product roadmap. I'll talk to it, but I won't show you the details until I have an offer in hand. Because remember, it's nothing to them to make an offer, because in due diligence, they can find stuff that forces them to roll the offer back. So there's no risk to them. Okay, so some deal structure concerns. In the interest of time, I'm going to go through them. I won't go through them. Let's see. Yeah, okay, maybe one. Does the assured compensation reflect a fair base valuation for your studio? That's something that matters. Is the assured portion including privately held stock, or is it public stock that you can actually trade? Is there a lockout period where you can't sell and you might be putting value at risk? Is the earnout portion the appropriate size for your business? And is it structured in a way that you have control to earn out? Because if you don't structure it in the right way and they have the right to say, do this, do that, do this, do that, how can you ever make your earnout? So you need to negotiate the earnout conditions so that you can. Is it achievable and reasonable? Is the deal structure structured to be tax efficient for you? That is, you have shares, and that's about long-term capital gains. And does the deal reflect that so that you can maximize your earnings? And then, quickly, it's my partner Bob and I. I think this is after we missed a flight to Finland one day. But if you ever have more questions or you want this presentation, feel free to contact me. And that's it, and I'll take some questions. Thank you.
Okay, one question from me. Can you maybe give very briefly a bad case or worst case example, how a deal works or does not work for developers selling to a publisher? Because the good case is maybe not so much where you can learn from, but a really bad case, a deal that was screwed up and why it was screwed up, something really where people can learn from that case.
Sure. No, that's an excellent question. Sure. Well, I mean, I think there are many bad cases all over the place, and so I can point to a few cases where kind of some of my points were not followed. Okay. So one. Microsoft bought a bunch of developers at GDC. I think you guys saw that. And I'd say that I believe most of them negotiated those exits themselves. So I was talking to them, to all of them, because I was just curious, and I asked one of them, how the negotiation process went. And they said it went great. It's like, are you happy? And they were happy, which is a good thing. And I said, so tell me about the negotiation process. And they said, well, Microsoft wanted to know how much I'd sell the studio for. I gave them the highest number I could possibly think of, and they jumped at it. Do you think that was a good deal? It's good from the perspective of the seller in that they met their own goal. It's not good because it's obvious from that they would have paid a lot more, and that their company was probably worth a lot more to Microsoft, right? So in that sense, they've left money on the table. And that's all money that's hard work that you guys have engaged in for years. So that's one. Another would be, had a company I was talking to, and they structured a deal in which they basically took the equity that they owned and they traded it for equity in the company that bought them that was private. And they didn't even believe in the business plan. So in the end, they held this illiquid equity and were governed by an organization that didn't know what it was doing. And rather than retaining its own fate, right, and choosing to do whatever it wants into the market by itself, it was basically taken over by this other company that then subsequently went bankrupt. And nothing. In fact, at one point, the only value that was ascribed to the buying company was the bought company before it went bankrupt. So those are a couple easy ones. Great. Anyone else? No? Thank you so much for your listening. Appreciate it.